You are a French merchant, sailing your goods across the English Channel. The morning is still and peaceful. The air smells of salt and sun. And then, you see them. 3 black ships, gliding like shadows across the water. Sails the color of the blood that spills wherever they sail. Sailors whisper that they are an omen, that when you see those sails, your fate is already sealed. They swarm aboard. Steel flashes. Men scream. You fight, but it is hopeless. The moment you saw those bleeding sails, you were already dead. Yet, somehow you awaken to discover that you are your crew's sole survivor. But you were not spared out of mercy. She always leaves one soul alive, one soul to carry her message, one soul to tell the men who wronged her of the massacre that happened here today, one soul to tell them exactly who is coming for them. She is the woman who rose from the ashes of grief to wage war with all of France. She is the woman who turned the seas into a hunting ground and made France itself her prey. She is the woman who carved her revenge into history and lived to tell the tale. She is Jeanne de Clisson, the Lioness of Brittany. Chapter 1. The setting, the country of Brittany, a fiefdom of the French crown, meaning while it was technically independent with its own customs and leaders, in reality they were fully under French control. It was a land apart, but never entirely free. Our protagonist, Jeanne de Clisson, born as Jeanne de Belleville, was growing up in a life surrounded by decadence and luxury, a far cry from her future brutality. Jeanne's family were merchants of salt and wine. Their ships sailed from Brittany's ports to markets across all of Europe, and their estates stretched far beyond the horizon. Like many noblewomen of her time, her life was shaped by marriage. At just 12 years old, she was arranged into her first marriage with, and good luck to me on this one, Geoffrey de Chateaubriand, the 8th. They would have 2 children together before Geoffrey's death 14 years later. And thus, her early life was ordinary, and well, boring. But it was never going to remain that way. Jeanne married Olivier de Clisson, a knight and a seasoned military officer. Some historians do believe that Jeanne and Olivier may have known each other for years before their wedding, perhaps even during her short-lived second marriage, and that their connection may have played a role in its annulment, an annulment that suspiciously happened just 1 year after Olivier's wife's death. Now, whether or not that is true, what is certain is that their union was more than a political arrangement. By all accounts, their marriage was a genuinely happy one, and they had 5 children during their time together. Olivier's land and influence as a knight, combined with Jeanne's vast wealth and estates, made them one of the most formidable couples in the country. Their union was so powerful, in fact, that it gave them seigneurial power over the border region of Brittany. For over a decade, they lived in prosperity and security, a family bound by love and a partnership that seemed unshakable. While they lived out what they thought was their happily ever after, there was a storm brewing in the background. The French and the English were about to place Brittany directly in the center of their burgeoning war. And in 1341, that storm arrived. Chapter 2. The War of Breton Succession. The War of Breton Succession could fill an entire video on its own. It's complicated, a massive political mess, and filled with a lot of different people all named John. So strap in, and I will try to make this make as much sense as I possibly can. This is John III, the Duke of Brittany, or at least this is a portrait of his funeral because unfortunately for John, a portrait of him does not exist. And unfortunately for the people of Brittany, he named 2 heirs to the duchy. Now, you may be asking, how does that possibly happen? Well, let's meet them and I will explain. This is John of Montfort. Being John III's half-brother, he would technically be the next in line for the duchy. Unfortunately for him, John III hated his guts and vowed to never allow him to become duke. So, in comes Charles de Blois, a French nobleman who married John III's niece. Charles had been chosen by John III to be the next Duke of Brittany. Until John III stabbed him in the back. On John III's deathbed, he made up with John of Montfort and officially wrote John of Montfort into his will as the official heir. Obviously, this did not sit right with Charles de Blois, and it definitely did not sit right with the nobles of Brittany, who have spent the last few years schmoozing Charles de Blois thinking he was about to become duke. So the majority of nobles in the fiefdom backed Charles for the duchy. John of Montfort knew he had to act fast if he wanted to be recognized as duke. He launched a rapid military campaign, seizing most of Brittany, which normally would be enough to claim the title. And he would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for the entire military might of one of the most powerful empires on the planet, the French. You see, I forgot to mention one tiny thing about Charles de Blois. His uncle happens to be Philip VIII, the King of France. A king who at the time was only a few years into the 100 Years' War against King Edward III of England, a war that, as the name suggests, still has a very long way to go. King Philip saw an opportunity to place a loyal puppet on France's western border, directly in between France and England, and gain an even stronger grip on the territory. France threw its full support behind Charles de Blois and sent the royal army into Brittany. This in turn forced John of Montfort to seek the backing of King Edward III, who would love to gain control of a country that directly bordered his enemy, and so he sent the English army into Brittany as well. And thus begins the War of the Breton Succession. Now you may be wondering how this little tangent is relevant to the story that I'm telling you here today, but let me promise you this war did not just serve as a proxy between the English and the French, no. This war is the catalyst that turned Jeanne de Clisson into the merciless savage that was the Lioness of Brittany. As I said, many nobles in Brittany supported Charles de Blois, and Jeanne and Olivier were among them. During the war, Olivier served as one of the military commanders under Charles. He was stationed in control of the city of Vannes. He fought fiercely for his cause, repelling 3 separate English attempts to take the city. But on the 4th attempt, the walls of Vannes could not hold any longer. The city fell, and Olivier was taken prisoner by the English. Chapter 3. The Execution of Olivier. Olivier is currently a prisoner of war with the English, so surely they're the ones that execute him, right? That's not exactly what happened. In fact, they set him free, and all they wanted in exchange was just one prisoner and a shockingly small sum of money for a noble of his stature. So, Olivier returned home to Brittany. But Charles de Blois no longer trusted him. He believed Olivier had failed in his duty to defend the city of Vannes, and worse, he believed he was working with the English, and the English wanted to let him go. Why else would they let him be free for such a small sum? With no evidence other than perhaps political convenience, Charles had Olivier arrested and charged with treason. He was taken to France and given a secret trial before King Philip. No evidence was ever presented to the public, and according to Brittany's own nobles, it didn't even exist. And yet, the king found him guilty and sentenced him to the guillotine. The sentence sent shockwaves through the nobility. Public executions were for peasants and common criminals, not for men of Olivier's status. To be beheaded in public was unheard of for a nobleman. Jeanne tried to save him, offering bribes to the authorities, but it failed. And even worse, she herself was accused of treason, just for trying to save her husband. She was able to escape the death penalty thanks to allies within Charles de Blois' own family, but most of her lands were stolen by the crown. She had nothing left. On August the 2nd, 1343, Olivier de Clisson was executed in Paris. His head was displayed on a pike above the gates of Nantes. To Jeanne, Olivier's death was not the result of war, but of betrayal, a murder ordered by Charles de Blois and King Philip. She led her sons Guillaume and Olivier V to the gates of Nantes and made them stare into the eyes of their father's severed head. She wanted them to feel the same rage that consumed her, to carry it as their inheritance. That day, she buried the noblewoman she had been, and a predator stepped out of the grief. The Lioness of Brittany was born. The Lioness sold off any land she had left, with most of the money coming from the Chateau de Clisson. With the fortunate brought, she raised a private army 400 strong. 400 men loyal to her and her sons unto death. Her first target was the castle at Chateau de Touffou. She rode to the gates alone, greeted by the officer in charge, a man that she knew and she had once called an ally in the service of Charles de Blois. And to him, she was nothing but an innocent noblewoman, so he let her in. But the Lioness did not enter alone. Her men poured in behind her, storming the castle. The battle was swift and decisive. Every French soldier was cut down where they stood. Every single soldier, except for one. But this was not an act of pity. No, this was her signature. The Lioness did not want to leave any room for mystery about what happened where she attacked. She made sure to always leave at least one living witness to tell her enemies about the brutal death that befell their fellow soldier, and to tell them exactly the name of the woman that did it. This target was to let Charles know he was weak, but her next target was personal. Chateau Thibaut. It was once under control of her husband, but was now held by the man she believed had him murdered. Her army struck with the same speed and brutality. The garrison was wiped out, save for a handful of signature survivors. These two attacks were devastatingly effective, but they came at a cost. The element of surprise was gone. Charles and the French never expected a noblewoman to begin sieging their fortresses at all, let alone so successfully. And that mistake ran red with the blood of their men. So they fortified their strongholds. Next time she struck, they would be prepared. At least, so they thought. All of this was by design. The Lioness wanted them to know she was hunting them, and she was not going to be stopped so easily. This time, she would take to the seas. She invested into a fleet of 3 warships. The Black Fleet. Each ship was painted entirely black. Its sails dyed a deep blood red. Her flagship bore the name, My Revenge. Some accounts do suggest that King Edward III of England may have aided her in acquiring these ships and outfitting them, though no concrete evidence of this has been found. She began her piracy in the Bay of Biscay. Her ships would lay in wait at the Fortress of Eu. From there, she ambushed French vessels. Meanwhile, King Philip sat in his palace in Paris, and one by one, grim messengers arrived at the French court. Salt-stained, hollowed-eyed men who had escaped the slaughter that no person should ever have to endure. Each told the same story. Their ship had been taken without warning and their crewmates butchered. They all mentioned one name that carried itself like a curse through the halls of King Philip's court. The Lioness of Brittany. And she was just getting started. She moved north into the English Channel, a far richer hunting ground, and it was there that she could hurt France the most. Here, she became a master of commerce raiding, deliberately avoiding warships and focusing exclusively on merchant vessels. Every ship she sank was another cut to France's supply lines, another blow to its war effort. Her strategy was simple but deadly. She would anchor off the coast near uninhabited islands with rough and rocky waters where escape was nearly impossible. When a target appeared, the Black Fleet would surge forward, swarming the merchant ship from all sides. The ship would be plundered, the crew would be cut down, and as always, one man would be left alive. For thousands of sailors, the last sight they ever saw was the Lioness's black-hulled ships closing in, and then darkness. For years, this was the rhythm of the Black Fleet. Stalk, strike, slaughter. Stalk, strike, slaughter. Stalk, strike, slaughter. As the war dragged on, the brutality of the Lioness only grew. No longer content with hunting ships alone, she turned her fury towards the French coast itself. Villages along Normandy's shoreline awoke to the sight of black-hulled ships on the horizon, and by nightfall, they were nothing but ash. Homes were burned to the ground with their defenders ruthlessly slaughtered, and as always, she left her signature survivors. During the 1346 Crécy campaign, a string of massive English raids through northern France, the Lioness used her fleet to ferry supplies to the English. This is a good time to mention that it is theorized that Jeanne de Clisson was a hired privateer for King Edward. Although, like I said earlier, there is no concrete evidence of this. Jeanne was a relentless thorn in France's side, her piracy continuing even after the death of King Philip in 1350. She had lived to see one of the 2 men she swore to destroy carried to his grave. But her war couldn't last forever. After countless raids and near escapes, the French Navy finally struck a fatal blow, sinking My Revenge and decisively ending the reign of the Black Fleet. Jeanne and her 2 sons were left adrift at sea for 5 days, clinging to wreckage in open waters until they were rescued by allies of John of Montfort. But the rescue came far too late for her son Guillaume, who died from exposure before they reached land. Some stories say that was the moment Jeanne laid down her sword, that the loss of her son ended her war. Others claim she continued her piracy for years. Whatever the truth, her legend was already sealed. The Lioness of Brittany had waged a personal war against the crown of France. She defied kings, burned strongholds, and pillaged the seas. And in the end, the Lioness of Brittany lived to tell the tale. But her story is not quite over yet. Jeanne de Clisson would eventually retire, and in this new retired life she would meet her fourth and final husband, a man named Walter Bentley. Walter was King Edward's lieutenant of Brittany, and was a man that was responsible for some of England's most important military victories in the territory. Using the sway this gave him, Walter petitioned the English king to restore Jeanne's lands, so King Edward happily restored the inheritance stripped from her after Olivier's death. For a moment, this looked like the final victory for Jeanne, but Charles de Blois betrayed her one final time. He weaved her estates into a peace treaty with England, and King Edward, bound by the agreement, forced Bentley to return Jeanne's land to Charles. Enraged, Bentley traveled to London in protest, where he refused to hand over Jeanne's lands. His defiance landed him in the Tower of London as a prisoner, though he was eventually released as the 100 Years' War was grinding to a stalemate as the Black Death was sweeping through England and France, halting the war. With the war seemingly over, Jeanne and Walter retired to the castle of Hennebon, a Montfort stronghold on the Brittany coast. There, after a life of bloodshed, Jeanne finally found peace. In 1359, Walter Bentley passed away, and only a few weeks later, Jeanne followed him into the afterlife. Her cause of death is unknown. Yet the War of Breton Succession was not finished. 3 years later, Charles de Blois rejected a peace treaty with John of Montfort, reigniting the conflict. And in 1364, the war reached its climax at the Battle of Array, where Charles de Blois would be slain in battle. John of Montfort would be crowned the Duke of Brittany, ending the struggle that had consumed Jeanne's life. Jeanne de Clisson's life was carved by grief and vengeance, but it did not end in despair. She had sworn to destroy the men who murdered her husband, and history remembers her as a woman who kept her vow. The Lioness of Brittany had waged a war against an entire nation, and in the end, she was able to happily retire to the coast, where she could watch the sun set over the sea that she once ruled. Thanks for watching.